now that we're happy with the actual art of the hair and we've finished this, it's time for optimization, which is not as fun. But I've got a few little tips to share. I rarely do it now for my personal projects. Like, it's just a step that I'd rather just skip. I do it a little bit, but yeah, not as in depth as in my professional work. So I think we've done a pretty good job so far at keeping it down in terms of poly count. You know, there's a few things you can do, especially with this tool. Keeping the base layers super low, only adding more geometry as and when you need it, rather than it just being a given. So yeah, I'm gonna show you how I will split the hair and optimize it a bit better. So what I do first is I extract the geometry in layers like this. So this way I can prioritize which parts I want to heavily optimize, aggressively optimize, and then leave the bits on top, rather than, you know, trying to optimize the entire thing with the same aggression. So yeah, I just do this. So what it will do is give you a group for each one of these. I'm just going to combine them. And then I'm going to take all of these, take all of these outside my main file, just so that I don't mess anything up. Okay, so got my lowest group here. We're just going to leave that because that is so ridiculously low poly already. And then I'm just going to gradually go up in the layers, and I'm going to be using mesh reduce for this. So what this does is reduces the dry count, poly count in the mesh. You can go in and edit the percentage. So I usually just start at 10, see where that gets me. This is quite low poly already, so I think I'm going to leave it at that. But yeah, the poly reduce is really effective. It's generally, I found it to be quite smart. It knows when, you know, it can work out when something can be reduced without losing the silhouette. You will still need to check it and tweak it and mess around with it. But yeah, it's a really quick and efficient way of sorting out the dry count. So I just go down the layers, and as I mentioned earlier, we've done a pretty good job at keeping this low, so I'm not going too crazy with it. I've found that just doing a 10% pass over all of it is enough to just trim off a little bit of that excess that we don't need. The more you reduce it, the more careful you have to be, because it will start to take away, like for example, this loop down the middle, and that will start to cause your cards to crash into each other, and you'll end up with clipping and stuff. So if you know, for example, your tribe budget's going to be about 30k, which is, I'd say, an average AAA budget. You want to keep your card as you're working as low as possible and start to account for all that clipping rather than do it super high, super crazy, and then have to do a ton of extra more work at the end to undo all your clipping and stuff. I can see here I've got a really obvious edge, which I don't want, and it's super visible, so I will show you what I do with those in a bit. So these cards, for example, they're quite short, so I think they can afford to be reduced again by another 10%. See here, it just takes out bits across here because it knows it's straight. It's very, very handy. So we've got it down to about 45k, which is all right. It depends on your budget and what you're making the hair for. That will decide your try limit, how much you've got to go in and reduce this down. I'm just going to tweak this by hand because it's a little bit crazy. The only problem with reducing the try count like this is it's quite destructive. So for example, if I wanted to go back in and fix this, I would have to re-export all of this whole layer and go in and reduce it again. So yeah, if you can, try and do as much of it within the curve tool. So here I've got a really awkward and sharp bend, so what I'm going to do is just bevel it like that. Quite a tedious fix having to go around and do all that, but it only adds geometry where you really need it, which is important. Go for the 20% this time. As you can see, there's still plenty of geometry there. Again, I'm just considering the visibility of some of these cards, like, am I actually going to see them? Which parts am I going to see? Which parts are worth giving the geometry to? And so because we've been messing with that and adding bevels in, just make sure to unlock and soften all this. So now we're at 41k. Usually I'd go a bit lower on this, but for the sake of the tutorial, if you just keep following those steps, keep reducing it down as much as you need. But for this, I don't need to go that far down. Looking pretty good. No major issues. No obvious clipping. Obviously you can see some edges, some bits of geometry. That is kind of, I won't say unavoidable, but it's, unless you're really gonna go in and perfect each single card, you're just gonna see it a bit. It's just a limitation of technology, I suppose.